The toughest mission the Lord would give my family and me was on the morning of September 11th, when our nation would finally acknowledge the culture of terror which had been at war with us for decades, and to which we would finally respond and no longer tolerate the despotism that foments it. I would love to tell you the Birdwell's 9/11 story started out with an act of heroism or valor on my part. It did not. I was simply coming out of the men's restroom, returning to my office. Yeah, that falls flat in veterans groups. Returning to my office, where I was watching the events of the World Trade Center in New York unfold. I'd had my morning Coke around 7, and at approximately 9:35, I stepped out. I told Sandy and Cheryl I would be back momentarily, and those were the final words I would speak to my two coworkers. I was about 7 or 8 steps out of the restroom in front of the elevators in the newly renovated Wedge on the 2nd floor when American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the Pentagon between the 4th and 5th corridors at the 1st and 2nd floor level. As you look at the picture that's about to be put up, I want you to clearly understand what a miracle it is for me to be with you today. This picture was taken by Officer Mike Garcia of the Pentagon Police Department a few minutes after the crash. The large X to the right side of the screen indicates the impact point of the nose of the fuselage at 1st and 2nd floor level. You can see the oval-shaped arc of the fuselage at the point of penetration just above the X. The portion of the building to the right of the vertical line would be the area that would collapse approximately 30 minutes later. The circled window is mine, and the window just to the right of my boss's office where Sandy and Cheryl and I were watching TV and where their remains would be recovered a few days later. The second slide shows the Pentagon a few days after the attack. My window still circled on the left, and the window to the right at the hinge of the collapsed area was where I was standing just a few yards behind that window, inside the corridor, about to turn, returning to my office through the crash site. I did not survive being 15 to 20 yards from the impact point of an 80-ton jet, a 757, traveling at 530 miles an hour with 3,000 gallons of gas or jet fuel, because the Army made me the toughest soldier in the Pentagon, or even because I'm a Texan. But because my Lord and Savior is as tough as they come. In an instant, I went from a well-lit hallway, fully aware of my surroundings and in charge of my faculties, to an earthly hell of fire, intense heat, choking black smoke, pain, and disorientation. In those first few moments, which seemed to last an eternity, I experienced the pain, both physical and emotional, of dying a ghastly, burning death. I was burned on 60% of my body, legs, back, face, neck, arms, with the latter accounting for nearly 40%, and which are completely regrafted. My facial areas, to include my eye sockets, forehead, ears, hands, have been reconstructed as well. My most life-threatening injury was the inhalation injury I sustained. My lungs were burned due to the heat, not only the aerosolized jet fuel in my lungs, but the choking black smoke that was inside them as well. Because of the blistering and gathering of fluid in my lungs, I was in fact beginning to drown. I was disoriented and unable to navigate my way out due to the loss of lighting, combined with the black smoke. I cannot put into words for you the abject panic that captures your heart when you not only experience death in such a horrible manner, but the helplessness of not being able to escape to safety. I knew I was facing the finality of my life, and when I crossed the threshold between the survival instinct and accepting death, I screamed, "Jesus, I'm coming to see you." I had surrendered, collapsed to the floor, and waited to die. I thought about Mel and Matt and how that morning would be my last to speak with them. In that moment that I gave up, the turmoil, pain, and panic was now filled with the silence and the peace of knowing I would soon be in eternity with Christ. As I lay in the corridor, waiting for the Lord to call me home, expecting to hear those words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," All I got was more "well done." So when I hear the terms, "the Colonel's original recipe" or "extra crispy," chicken isn't what comes to mind. There would still be many more tough moments. Inside the emergency room at Georgetown University Hospital, it was like a battle drill. Lots of activity, voice commands, energy, intensity, but no chaos. Dr. Williams told me that he would shortly put me under general anesthesia, so I knew in my heart I was speaking my last words. I told Dr. Williams I wished to do two things. I asked Major John Collison, who had ridden with me to the hospital, to take the wedding ring off my finger and give it to Mel and tell her that I loved her. Jewelry's normally cut off of burn survivors since gold melts near 800 degrees. But I didn't want the ring destroyed. When the nurse removed it to give it to John, it was like running an overdone hot dog through something of a smaller diameter, except the hot dog was my ring finger, and since most of the skin was already gone, when she pulled the ring off, it showed exposed bone and blood was streaming everywhere. But I don't recall it hurting, not because of the morphine shot I was given at the Pentagon, but rather because I was concentrating on the dignity of what I knew was my imminent death. I then asked the hospital chaplain to say a final prayer, acknowledging God's sovereignty in my life and accepting His will for me, should I awake or not from that anesthesia. After Chaplain Cirillo led that prayer, I then told Dr. Williams, not from the strength of a soldier, but with faith in my Savior, let's get on with it, resting in the comfort of Christ's command of my life. Mel would arrive at Georgetown, and the staff would guardedly tell her what to expect. I was unconscious in ICU. She could only see me for a few seconds to keep the area sterile, and that I would not look anything like I did when I'd left home that morning. And no words were truer to her when she came in and saw what was her husband. Lieutenant General Peake, the Surgeon General of the Army at the time, would visit in the early morning hours of the 12th of September and strongly encourage Mel to get Matt up to see me. Mel would very wisely process this advice, that my chances of survival were very poor and that Matt needed to come by, see his father, and say goodbye before I passed. Matt would make that visit, and it would be wonderful, yet solemnly mournful, as we said goodbye to each other without saying a word. Because of the trach tube in my throat with the respirator connected to it, I had no air passing over my vocal cords, so I was unable to speak, leaving me in the silence of my own thoughts. I would spend long days and nights counting the seconds and minutes of intense pain with only my silent plea for the Lord's mercy through death. I wanted my physical suffering and Mel and Matt's emotional agony of watching me slowly die to be finished. Dr. Jang telling Mel they had decided to use sterile larvae. That's the nice medical term for maggots. They were needed to eat the infection and dead tissue that were putting me at great risk of amputation of both arms. Dr. Jang would have them FedExed to D.C. from the University of California Irvine Medical Center, and for 3 days I would consider those small, nasty pieces of rice, the maggots, crawling on me a great improvement to how I looked prior to their application. And with great respect for the memory of Ronald Reagan, we all know that California has the best maggots in the nation. Worst of all would be the debridement process the burn survivor experiences. The daily agonizing cleansing bath in a large stainless steel tub or tank where you're placed in a solution of water, iodine, and either a mild bleach, chlorine, or some type of antiseptic. The sting is like when as a kid, you had a cut on your hand and your mom put rubbing alcohol on it, but since nearly your entire body is an open wound, the intensity of pain is absolutely excruciating. Then you exponentially increase it when the nurses take a wash rag to your open wounds. With my inability to speak, only the Lord could hear me scream. All the while, Mel was with me the entire way. She was living her marriage vows with incredible rigor. She was my advocate, and like all military spouses, the strongest ladies I know. I would be... I would be hospitalized at the Washington Hospital Center for 92 days, in intensive care for 26, on the respirator for 24, the ghastly tank sessions, the infections, threatening amputation, the maggots, the grueling physical therapy that would make a professional athlete look forward to two-a-days in the Texas heat. And this past summer, this past June, I walked to the operating room for the 39th time, and hopefully the last. But there was one day that was far tougher for our visitors than it was for us. On September 13th, Mel would get a call on her cell phone from a Secret Service agent requesting permission for President and Mrs. Bush to visit us at the Washington Hospital Center that day. It's a funny story that you need to have her tell you. They would come to the hospital, both very gracious and genuine, and at the time I was prepared for surgery with just sterile towels over my arms, portions of my head, and legs. President Bush would come to the foot of my bed, render the salute, and out of respect for a wounded service member, and as he held his salute for me and I tried to return it, just as you're about to look at my final slide, this is what President Bush was looking at, and my horrific injuries in plain view. He would drop his salute, step to the side of my bed, champion me and promise me and you and every American that the culture of terrorism that bred, recruited, trained, deployed, and financed this vile act, and so many before September 11th, would no longer be tolerated. We have taken the offensive in the war on terror for good reason. You do not have to spend time at the School of Advanced Military Studies at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, to know that defense may win you Super Bowls in the NFL, but in warfare or political competition, it only gets you casualties without any corresponding accomplishments. Offense is one of the 8 principles of war. Defense is not. Just as we have gone on offensive to give the people of the Middle East a better chance or a better choice than despotism and Islamofascism, we have a party must continue to stay on offensive to give Texas and our nation a better choice than liberalism.